All right, we are live. Today is what, 9/7? The IPS morning deprogram. We were going to be live last night for the Infinite Plane Saturday, but quite literally, the moment I hit play or start, my connection went down. So I couldn't use the laptop where I had all the comments. So I will be getting my internet turned back on later today, hopefully. But no big deal. That's why we do mobile live streaming. And so let's go ahead and go over the notes. Okay, main thing is PSYOP trading cards. Those are still in production. I know it's been delayed. A lot of things got pushed back because I'm in the process of moving. But that's going to change soon. But I'm trying to figure out, what's the best way to get back to a nightly schedule? Like sitting down in the same place every day at the same time and doing open phone calls. And Metascript deconstruction. We know there's an audience for it because that's primarily what we've done. The audience didn't go away. I kind of did. And mainly because my situation, which has me frequently bouncing around. But I'm looking at getting into a more stable situation. And so I've been inspecting these various office spaces, and I believe I've settled on the ones on Moon Street. Best location, best accommodations, 24-hour access. And it's a much safer place. The place that I was at, not that I felt unsafe, but there were encampments all around. A lot of people having parties, I guess you could say. I mean, is that what they're doing? The fentanyl heads, they're not mourning. They're obviously high, which I guess makes it a party. But, just bad elements. Although there weren't as many murders around there as I thought there would be. When I got there, I kind of predicted that there would be for example, there's a gas station across the street. And I was like, let me do a countdown. How many days until somebody gets blasted? The new thing here, and I don't know if it's a pattern, but I've seen 3 examples of it now, are gangs or groups of teenagers, minors, stealing cars and then thrill killing. Like, thrill killing is a thing. They shot some homeless guy sleeping in a tent. Then another group shot some homeless guy sleeping on a bench. And then one individual was trying to stop someone from stealing his work truck, and I think they filled him up with 27 rounds. I mean, insanity. Speaking of Albuquerque, you know who lives here? Uncle Fester. I was watching this series on the Addams Family. It's this Netflix kind of a dry comedy, and Uncle Fester has all these fake IDs. He flashes his license, and it's right here in Albuquerque. Although it's a fictional address. I was going to go pay him a visit. Jungle Jim says scripted NFL or IPS. For the movement, I choose IPS. Hey, appreciate that. Is NFL scripted? Well, here's one thing we can say for a fact. The entire sports media is part of the PSYOP entertainment complex. Their narratives feed into it, their propaganda conduits. So to think that they're somehow exempt or that sports are it's pure, it's outside of the news, I just go there to no. It's all part of the same system. Am I saying that the games are fake? Not necessarily. But it's all rigged. It's rigged in many ways. It's a closed system. It's basically a secret society. You don't get in unless you, quote, play ball. There's got to be NDAs like crazy. So you couldn't exactly consider it to be completely fair, laissez, it's rigged. It's not free market. It's not meritocracy 100%. Who knows? There's a movie coming out very soon called Him. And I think it's about football and about how people get to the top. And it looks decent. It looks, in fact, horrifying. but it's probably closer to the truth than not. There's a couple of corgis walking by. I'm not going to record because I don't want to look like a stalker. And I've seen those gloves, like, the magnetic gloves, magnetic goalposts. But the idea that you couldn't get a whole team to be in on it has been refuted with the whole, was it Damar Hamlin? With all the 33s and the 3.3 million raised for some kind of heart thing. He has a heart attack on the stage, and everybody is kneeling for this player with the fake ambulance on the football field, except for one guy whose name is Neely, and he's got like a 33 on his jersey. But it looked like the image you've probably seen from Duncan Rituals of the Masons kneeling around Hiram Abiff's unconscious body. But the main thing is that I would, because, you could get into debates as to how much of it is faked, how much is real or riggable. Well, I would say if the whole team is going along with a plan that they cannot refuse, obviously it could be rigged. I mean, everything would have to be considered like a need-to-know basis. You can't let this thinking that everybody would be in the know block you from seeing the potential for exploiting these situations. But also, even the very bottom level people have to be, they're complicit with the blood oaths, the NDAs. Sports entertainment. But there are people who've gone into very specific plays that look scripted or outcomes that seem to have been forced. But when you get into like the magnetic rims on the goalposts, I'm like, I don't know. This could all just be a big magic show. And they're getting paid a lot of money. It's not hard to get people to lie. Obrick says sports could be real and get the same results, so why rig it? Yeah, that's one of the things to consider too. You wouldn't have to fake the actual athletics and the gameplay. That could all be run organically. And the sports media platforms can still be used to serve the broader PSYOP entertainment complex. A great example of this is the narrative surrounding the post-9/11 game with the New York Jets versus the Patriots. So you get it, like New York Jets versus the Patriots. And then you had the psychological victory of letting the Patriots beat the Jets. So it's not different from WWF, where the players and their little stories are feeding into the PSYOPs of the day, or PSYOPs of the future. Tons of predictive content within World Wrestling Entertainment. And speaking of wrestling entertainment, Raja Jackson has not been arrested. So I want to know, how do I go to a sporting event, jump on the stage, punch someone in the face 23 times, sending teeth and blood flying everywhere, and not get arrested? Someone explain this to me. It's almost like it was kayfabe, almost like it wasn't real. Dwayne Alberth says, football is the most easily rigged sport of them all. Obrick says, Tom Brady debut. Right, Tom Brady. Now, now there was someone else. There was Tebow. Remember Tim Tebow? There was this interesting thing with Tim Tebow and Colin Kaepernick. And it had to do with the symbolic kneeling. So Tebow would do the T-bow. It's all in the name too, kind of, where I think he would do some kind of kneeling for God or something whenever he would make a touchdown or something. T-bowing. And it was kind of interesting how it preceded Colin Kaepernick, who began the whole kneeling during the national anthem. So they use these things for, obviously, building into the bigger PSYOPs. And Super Bowl 47, which I thought was predictive of Trump's presidency, we'll still see. Super Bowl 47, 2013, was the Blackout Bowl. 33 minutes of darkness. And Kaepernick was the quarterback for the Blackout Bowl. So what is the significance there? Well, if you think about it, the kneeling during the national anthem was kneeling against systemic racism, and it was Kaepernick who was quarterback. Well, he later, and the 33 minutes of darkness was before the kneeling. So he's connected with the 33 minutes of darkness, the Blackout Bowl, and then later the kneeling thing. And there was this comparison made between two NFL players and this double standard, where one of them was kneeling and it was somewhat lauded and praised, and the other one was kneeling and it got him kicked out of the NFL. Likely at the behest of Trump, if you follow the subtext. It gets even more interesting, I think, as it goes on. You know, this kneeling thing, when 2020 rolls around, and Derek Chauvin sets things off by kneeling with the George Floyd event, the kneeling on George Floyd. And, you know, those questions, was he kneeling on his neck? Was it fentanyl? No, it was fake. The George Floyd psyop really messes people up. Because just the way that they respond to it, if it's in the box thinking, it's invariably bad if you're a truther and you're saying, oh, well, no, he died of an overdose. Because then you're taking like the side of Team Chauvin, which is not a good team to be on because it's been branded Team Western Chauvinism, systemic racism. But he brought the kneeling out, which was then mirrored by BLM and the police who would kneel during their protests. So what's up with all the kneeling? And then you have this Daniel Penny strangling Jordan Neely, which again, the kneeling being consistently tied in here with the systemic oppression, racism narrative, the class war stuff. My point being, the sports media is dragged into this stuff. It has all the symbolism, and then you get into the Super Bowls. What's up with the Super Bowls? It's like, okay, these are clearly, at a very minimum, these are in themselves influence operations and psyops. The last one, was it when Taylor Swift showed up, the Pentagon's like, Taylor Swift is not a psyop. They made the word psyop go mainstream with that event. Obrick says, same when you tell the right-wingers that Rittenhouse court drama is a hoax. Yeah, exactly. But let me get to the George Floyd thing really quick. So here's how it's interpreted. The MSM minus position, which is the subtractive, looking at the thing as a hoax, as a psyop, nobody died, it was all staged. That gives you one take on it. Actor, not really dead. And when you look into this perspective, we're including things that others may not know, like the fact that Derek Chauvin and George Floyd worked together for years. You wouldn't know perhaps about a coworker who was describing the relationship between these two guys. So the unlikelihood of it increases when you're like, wait a minute here, your coworker's kneeling on your neck. And instead of saying, hey, Derek, let up a little bit, you just moan, I can't breathe, and act like you don't know who it is. Like, so that in itself is really strange. Then you get into the background of Chauvin and how his neighbors thought he was a real estate agent. No, he's a cop. And how he's got a house in Florida. He's got a house there in the Twin Cities. And then you got the symbolic and the indicators of hoax that connect it to 9/11, you know, Twin Cities, Twin Towers, the 846 connection to when the towers were hit, the time George Floyd was kneeled on. There are just so many points that build up here when you look at the bigger picture that this thing was a staged psyop. You know, the sun set in the Twin Cities at 846. And the setting of the sun is all symbolic of the the Lord of Darkness, Prince of Darkness, Saturn killing the sun god by dismemberment or suffocation in many of the myths, like the asphyxiation. But the timing of the sunset correlating with the asphyxiation time is highly ritualistic, and again, it connects to 9/11. And the twin stuff is off the charts. The mech says porn actor too. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, and then there was the way they introduced the thing, where they're like, oh, this is George Floyd, and you got this poster of him in front of a big Corona bottle with a bunch of what looked to be COVID spikes in the background. But our perspective is inclusive of all the other things that we would consider to be hoax indicators, but also things which connected to other analogous events that have been previously revealed as hoaxes. But moreover, my point here is simply that our interpretation is more informed. So we disbelieve he died because we have more information. This is informed disbelief. This isn't just calling it fake because it looks fake. But the mainstream version, which is shared by the mainstream on the left, the woke left, is that he was killed by systemic racism. And that is the narrative that kicked off the BLM riots, that Derek Chauvin is essentially emblematic of Western chauvinism. And the Proud Boys who emerged strongly at the time, and by the way, Rittenhouse is a Proud Boy. He got initiated, if you remember. The Proud Boy movement is based upon Western chauvinism. They call themselves Western chauvinists. And the name Derek, just getting back into the symbolism, associated with the hangman who supposedly hanged 3,000, very 9/11-y number. And even the name Derek has somehow worked its way into part of the crane because of some innovation he made on the gallows. So you got the hangman of the West and systemic racism oppressing the poor, all in this little psyop, this one scene, the kneeling scene, which kind of told the whole story. George Floyd represents the poor, the oppressed, the victims of basically the West. And I can't breathe, another interesting bit of symbolism here, was later applied also to Gaia, because capitalism is making it so the poor are suffocating, but it's also suffocating the globe. But this is a perfect anagram. This may not mean anything, but a better China. But the connotation here is this was the year, right? This is right when the C-19 kicked off, the China virus. So there was some fascinating stories built into this whole thing. But now that's, our perspective is looking at the bigger picture and how it ties into the broader Psy-War and why we have every reason to think that this was a psychological operation to kick off the summer of riots with the specific narrative attached. But now the red pill or the woke right opinion here, since they're on the anti side, you got the pro media, pro mainstream, you got the anti. On the anti side, they agree that George died, but they don't think Derek Chauvin did it. And they don't think it was because of the corrupt police system that oppresses racial minorities. No, they say, no, Derek Chauvin did his job correctly. And that Floyd died from an overdose. So they essentially sign off on what was a horrible event and say it was his fault, victim blaming. So they look terrible because they mock George Floyd. In fact, there's this reoccurring joke that Alex Stein often makes, and it actually pissed off Stephen Jackson, George Floyd's so-called twin, where he said, I want to congratulate George Floyd, 5 years sober. Like, they made this joke repeatedly, and I'm like, wait a minute here, where is that exactly coming from? Because the people who were supporting Derek Chauvin in this are the same people who believe in, like, sovereign citizen crap, where they feel like if they're getting pulled over, their rights are being infringed, and they cite kind of like archaic legal language to try to get out of tickets. And they see guys who are pulled over by cops and fighting the system as martyrs and fighting the system. Well, now you have somebody who's a literal victim of the system, and you're celebrating his death. Like, that is just in bad taste. Lord Laney says, if lies by omission are one of the best weapons, has Building 7 been scrutinized with auto hooks or lens, or is it more propagated force out there? Yeah, that's an interesting one. What's up with Building 7? I had this theory that maybe the one that went down in Shanksville, the Shank, that's the one where they had the knives, the box cutters. Let's roll. Another disappearing plane. But the Shanksville thing, that plane was pushed down. And my thinking was, well, maybe that one was like supposed to hit Building 7. And they couldn't make that happen. Or the explosion that was supposed to correspond with the impact point didn't go off. It's like maybe it didn't quite work out perfectly. I don't know. The thing is, the 9/11 truth movement was always controlled opposition. Like with the George Floyd, the 9/11 truth movement starting point was it was a real terror attack. The question is, was it done by our government or by Muslims? And speaking of 9/11 and the attacks, Tucker Carlson has more or less issued an apology to the Bin Laden family. Tucker Carlson? How are they doing it? Cutter. They're mashing up his name. They're basically saying that he's on Team Hamas, and he's saying Hamas is not a terror group. And he's really going against the neocon interpretation of these events, and he's taking the side of the terrorists, which was kind of like what the 9/11 truth movement was doing. The 9/11 truth movement was trying to exonerate the accused. And then, of course, blame it on Bush. But now, as far as WTC-7, a couple of things about that one. Wasn't that 7? How many floors was it? I need to get the numbers because some of this stuff is insane. Let's look at that really quick. Flight 77 flies for 77 minutes, and it hits the Pentagon, which is 77 feet high, the construction of which began 9/11/1941, 60 years before the attack. So you have a lot of numerology encoded into this stuff that's just impossible to deny. And this is the stuff that turned a lot of truthers into synchromystics, into believing that they're looking at the simulation glitches. But look, one of the ways you can rule out the idea that 9/11 was somehow at all exhibiting symptoms of being a simulation, or rather influenced by the simulation, is that 9/11 had copious predictive programming for many, many years, but also a lot of concurrent programming. Movies released at the same time, the months leading up to it, or even right after. I mean, Collateral Damage was late, and they altered it because of its resemblance to 9/11. There are dozens and dozens of examples, but beyond that, which the synchromystics take as evidence that we're in a simulation, beyond all that, there were 88 drills, the NRO, there were 88 drills being performed. One of them I read somewhere is more than 1,000 mass casualty actors. They were these like police officer cadets. But these drills were all terror drills being carried out that day. So when you really look at this, it's like, well, you can't say that this wasn't planned in advance, because there were crisis actors, mass casualty actors all over the place. They were basically living through a simulation or drills, and they were told, okay, now it's become real. No, they used the drills as a cover to set up and stage the magic show. But my point being is this, just to get back to where I was going with that, is that the truther point of view in Trutherville, MSM Plus, it's a subset of the mainstream mediation. In their version, it's real, but Bush did it. Or it's real that Bush did it in collusion with Israel. But the problem is, they say it's real. All of the woke right J-Pill people, the Hitler fan club, they love the Israel scapegoat story. So when we tell them, no, the whole thing was a psyop, a movie, a staged event, and we can totally explain how this is even possible. It's not hard. especially when you're looking at a time period, and that might have been the last year where it could have been possible, where they could have pulled something like that off in full view of the public. Although a lot of it was done under the cover of military smog, which was mislabeled by the media as smoke. What's up, MSO Wind? Obrique says Pentagon, negative 77 degrees west to... Well, look, there's quite a lot here that I'm trying to get to, but the main thing is this. If your starting point is it's real, it doesn't matter if you're mainstream or alternative. Your starting point is wrong. Your starting point is the world stage. If the world stage is your POV, and the world stage is the accepted consensus version of things, including the alternative, that's something that the truthers don't get, is that alternative media is part of the same media ecosystem. So what makes us different, the MSM minus position, the off-world stage, is that we don't start with the presupposition that it was real, fighting over who did it. And 9/11 truthers have been stuck on this. They've been stuck in this cul-de-sac since 9/11. They haven't figured it out. Some of them kind of figured out the no planes thing, but then they all became a bunch of Mandela effectees and never arrived at the correct conclusion. Quay says, have you seen the Hexen 2.0 Tarot? It reminds me of the Illuminati card game and your PSYOP trading cards. I'll take a look for inspiration. Estevan says, yeah, you people are arguing over made-for-TV movies and TV shows. Yeah, now, you're right about that. But what the ultimate effect of this is, the PSYOP entertainment complex is creating contemporary myths. You could look at 9/11 in a way as a myth. Like if you think about what history is, it's a sequence of events that are recorded that the consensus agrees upon that tell us how we got here. And one of the things that media has been doing, that it was built to do, is what religions used to do. They would codify myths. These are the agreed upon versions of things that have happened. And what they do, what religions do, is they try to convince you that their myths are history. Like, my gods are real. My myths are real. And that's the main fight. Whoever can prove to the satisfaction of the masses that their myths are real gets to dominate. So the dominant world religion today is mainstream mediation. It is the world stage, and the meta script, which is the historical record that we all agree upon, the one that's performed through PSYOPs. This is the dominant worldview. This has supplanted religions, and its myths become history. Think about all the fake things we've lived through, the fake scenarios, the influence operations, all the psychodramas that are actually staged theatrical events that have become cemented into our history as like carved into stone, etched into stone. And if you question it, you're a conspiracy theorist. Why do you think they have such a big controlled opposition infrastructure? To control the story, they need to have a system to catch the minds that stray or that disagree with the mainstream. So they're still included. Like Alex Jones, he's going to be in the history books, but his version of things is going to be assumed wrong. And one more thing too about this world stage perspective, all AI is going to be in the MSM position. And the MSM, the mainstream position, the mainstream mediation, assumes that all the history is real. It's not inclusive of fake news, fake events. HLG, thank you very much. You've been here for 13 months as a member. Yeah, so 9/11 Truth was an abysmal failure. And they were also the ones, so when I first started looking into this stuff, that's when I heard the term false flag. And Alex Jones was out there educating everybody on how Operation Northwoods revealed documents. This was a plan to put on enemy uniforms and conduct a terror attack and scapegoat the enemy. So false flag became part of the Trutherville lexicon. So now this is the new frame, which I addressed this in the new book. The new frame for examining media for newbies who think something's up with 9/11. So now the truther framework is false flag, or I could put true flag, but false flag or real as broadcast. So if you're a truther and something happens, you're going to say it's either real as the news says, or it's a false flag, which means it's real, but somebody else did it. So both of these presuppose it's real. The question is, who did it? Who the mainstream says or who the conspiracy theorists say? The problem with truthers is their built-in assumption of the reality of the event. And you can find people on X, just if you follow any big truther channels, conspiracy channels, who talk about psyops and hoaxes, they will say people die. They will get mad at me and block me for saying nobody's dying. So what's the difference between being mainstream and alternative? Well, let's see here. You got one big plot of land, you got one shepherd, and then you've got two different paddocks. What's the difference? You're being fed by the same shepherd. You're basically the same thing, pro and anti. That's why I say you have to take the anti-pro. You have to reject both. And so the MSM minus perspective doesn't start with the assumption it's real. So why would anybody still remain alternative media? And to be alternative media isn't about following certain talk show hosts or certain believing certain things like, oh, the moon landing's fake alone. Like, it's actually a worldview thing. It's how you process new information. And it's also about your presuppositions. So getting back to the 9/11 thing, if your presupposition is that 9/11 was real and you think it was done by Israel, well, now this justifies you being a groyper. This justifies you being a Nick Fuentes listener. Because now you have evidence that your bad guy attacked your country and killed 3,000 of your people and dragged you into a war. And when you hear 9/11 truthers, that's what they're so mad about. They're like, Bush, Cheney, military-industrial complex. And so for them, this horrible thing happened and the crime has never been properly prosecuted. So they see themselves as avenging that. So what happens when you say the whole thing was fake? If nobody died, then these guys aren't culpable. If it was a Hollywood production, a government media production, then you have nobody to be mad at. And the reason and this is getting back to the idea it's a myth. Why do you have a myth? They need the myth to create these demographics, to create the antis, to give the groypers a reason to exist, to give the woke right a reason to exist. The reason why they did the George Floyd psyop is to give the woke left a reason to exist. So the woke left can look at George Floyd and they can say, my worldview has been validated. We're being oppressed. I got to fight the system. Woke right can look at 9/11 and say, we got to fight the secret rulers of the world and expose it. So these are myths. These are manufactured events that are inserted into our historic narrative, the metascript, for the purposes of keeping the population perfectly polarized within the political horseshoe structure on a world stage defined as the worldview predicated upon the existence of history as reported and according to the news as it's reported, what I call the news testament, because it is a new religion. And our new worldview that we've been given is a very selective version representative of a monopoly. Soul 101 says, notice how the main perpetrators of alternative media have governmental connections. MSO Win said, could all then be a wag the dog scenario? Yeah, look, wag the dog is the standard operating procedure. It's the rule, not the exception. PSYOPs are a feature. These aren't anomalies. I'm going to have to put the forest of fakery allegory into the book before I publish it. So the idea here is this. You have PSYOPs that every truther can see, but they all take place within the context of a bigger script, the Psy War. So these are individual events, but they're all taking place within a fictional universe, and they all build on each other. And these are things that all exist within the framework of the world stage. So if you look at a individual PSYOP as a fake tree, you got truthers walking through a forest, and every once in a while, some loudmouth with a megaphone will point out a fake tree. And all the truthers will gather around the fake tree, and loudmouth with the megaphone will say, buy my supplements, look at this fake tree, buy my supplements. And this goes on for 20 years. Meanwhile, every single tree is made of rubber. They're all fake, they're all plastic. So you got a forest of fakery. But the people who notice the fakery are hyper-focused on one or two big trees. So that's why they're always screeching, 9/11, Sandy Hook, 9/11, Sandy Hook. Okay, well, you've been distracted effectively by the carnival barkers, whose job it is to prevent you from seeing the big picture. They want you to feel special because you've seen a PSYOP. So now you're validated. Now you've got the truth. You've been given some indication that you're on the right path. But they never let you go so far as to see the Psy War. They'll let you blame 9/11 on Israel, on reptilians, on George Bush and the Skull and Bones Society. They'll run down all these rabbit trails. Oh, it was a big satanic sacrifice. But they'll never say, no, it was fake. Because to say it was fake would necessarily involve all of the world governments, all the media in some kind of monolithic agenda that they're all a part of. Oh, and that's why I say it is a one world religion. So you're right, it is a wag the dog scenario. In fact, the movie Wag the Dog, this is another example that I love bringing up because it perfectly illustrates what we're talking about here. So Wag the Dog, the movie, is about a president having some kind of a sex scandal. So they have a fake war in Albania to distract the public. So this movie comes out and it shows green screens, crisis actors, and manipulating global media. And it's a comedy, right? Well, the movie came out just at the same time that Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky had their sex scandal. And then Bill Clinton had some kind of missile strike on some pharmaceutical, some kind of place was bombed. And they said it was Wag the Dog, that Bill Clinton was wagging the dog. But I'm pointing out here the timing of the movie Wag the Dog and its connection to the Bill Clinton scenario is not a coincidence. That's what we would call concurrent programming. It's at the same time. Kind of strange how sometimes you get these clear examples of truth in plain sight where it's like almost a joke. And I think it is a joke because what is the difference between the insiders and the outsiders? The outsiders who haven't been brought into the cults, the secret society networks, who haven't signed the security clearances, the outsiders have a wool sack over their heads. They call it the hoodwink. They're blind to how the world really works, and they live in a world of darkness. Those who've been brought into the temple have the hoodwink removed, and they see the lights of the temple and all the people who are in the club. And so there's a split between those in the know and those who have not seen the light. The public has not seen the light. We are the profane. Profane means outside the temple. We're kept outside of the temple. And today's hoodwink, it's not a wool sack over your eyes. It's the opaque black screen. It's the black mirror. It's the filter through which all of your perceptions are being interpreted and steered and directed. Not a coincidence that it looks like a little monolith, because this all ties back to Stanley Kubrick, 2001, A Space Odyssey, which has everything to do with where we are right now. Kubrick is a great meta scripter to study in this context. Now, what's interesting about Stanley Kubrick is that there's an entire subculture of conspiracy theorists who hyperanalyze Stanley Kubrick movies. And they always get it wrong. And I think it's by design. Because they want you to think that Stanley Kubrick was an anomaly, that he's a whistleblower. He's trying to tell us something. No, actually, when you look at every movie as though it were a Kubrick movie, you'll find that not every single movie, but all of the big top movies have these elements of tying in to the meta script, helping to create our history for us. Case in point, James Cameron. The Titanic is the #1 highest grossing movie of all time. And it has the whole thing with the ship splitting in two, sinking, like 9/11, towers, jumpers. Terminator 2, plenty of 9/11 predictive programming. Unbelievable. I mean, actually, when you understand the methodology here, it's demonstrable. It's not unbelievable. But Stanley Kubrick showed the image of the monolith. And if you didn't know, the movie 2001 Space Odyssey, 1968, same year the tower construction began. 33 years later, and 1968 was when 9/11 became the national emergency number. 33 years later, the towers go down. After the towers go down, what's overlooking the towers at ground zero? The Hilton Monolith Hotel. The story is also told in the architecture. These towers, like the Twin Towers, the One World Trade Tower, all kinds of occult stuff about it because it's part of the bigger script. So Kubrick was revealing here, and this is the movie screen has the same dimensions as the monolith. And the monolith had the sun and the moon over it. So the sun, and this is like Jungian symbolism, but this is kind of consistent with New Agey as well. The sun would represent the light, logic, logos, reason, the waking world we all share. And the moon would represent the subconscious, the dreaming mind, fantasy, illusion, lunacy, crazy, reason, unreason. The merging of the two with the screen gets really significant here because the news, and you'll notice, look how many news agencies use the symbol of the sun. The news, and Jordan Maxwell actually had a pretty good talk about this, one of his final public talks about Caesar and the sun and how it's the official version of things, but like I think he said is north, east, west, south, the idea that the world stage as defined by the sun god incarnate by Caesar. But anyway, the symbolism here is that the news is like the solar. This is what's going on in the world. These are the facts. But the silver screen, and again, the sun is gold, the moon is silver. If you look at their associations, the silver screen is the dreaming mind, the fantasy, the fiction, the movies, the fantasies that are targeting our imagination and not necessarily our reason and our logic. So we have these twin streams of propaganda, entertainment and news, solar and lunar. And what they have done with the PSYOP entertainment complex is they have merged the solar and the lunar with the movie screen. And so you got Kubrick with his highly predictive 2001 Space Odyssey that does have 9/11 predictive programming, COVID predictive programming. It's crazy. But when he shows the eclipse over the monolith, I think that was basically showing like 2 into 1. This could be the sun and the moon, the merging of the 2 into 1. So then you have the two towers, the twins, which could be these aspects of the mind, merged. And now we have the one world tower. So the two did become one. And this 2 into 1 with the merging of the world is a common theme. Like Event 201 that preceded the COVID thing, which did unite the world. And interestingly enough, the One World Trade Tower does look like a big giant syringe. All kinds of one world symbolism with this thing, 1776 feet high. I'm not going to get into the architecture of it too much, but it did open 13 years after 9/11 on 11/3. What is the significance of 11/3 in a giant syringe? Well, you can look at these things as 11/3 or 3/11, very interchangeable. 3/11 was the 9/11 of this particular, it's a generational psyop. Yeah, great point there. Duet say less. The attention on Kubrick deflects from other movie directors who may be involved. Yeah, so here's what I'm saying too, and this is not a controversial statement. The biggest movies have been co-opted for the uses of government propaganda, big psyops, writing our history. So the world stage, the masses are here hoodwinked at the bottom in a world of subjectivity. And then you have this pyramidal structure of need to know. So security clearances will determine how high up you go into this thing. And so you may know, let's say you're working with Department of Homeland Security and you're doing mass casualty drills, or you're a part of the bombing drill, like in the London bombings. They were doing drills when the bombings happened. So these people are obviously in the know. Hey, we're running psyops on the public. So they may know about that particular psyop, but it doesn't mean they know about all of it. And so who writes the psyops? So people always look at the crisis actors at the bottom, or the police chiefs that are involved. But nobody in truth or real ever asks, well, who's writing these things? What about the aesthetics, the presentation? And, with Kubrick, his main thing is he's known for Apollo 11. And so there are people who will go through his movie, The Shining, and they'll find all kinds of hints that Apollo 11 was Kubrick's work. But what they all miss, and I think this is by design, I think his name is Jay Dyer, they all miss this. They all miss that there's even more content in The Shining predicting 9/11. Predictive of 9/11 than for Apollo 11. But they ignore that stuff. So Apollo 11, 9/11. You also find 9/11 stuff in Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket. The release dates are always interesting with all of his work. But my point is, Kubrick gets all the documentaries, all the attention, and these documentarians who look at The Shining and watch it like 100 times, which is a boring movie, they don't look at other movie directors with the same critical lens. Critter Fest Sanctuary says, I believe we did not go to the moon. They don't need 13 refueling stops at the SpaceX, no matter how heavy the payload is. It's a lie piece. Well, there's this idea that they faked the moon landing to trick the Russians, a propaganda war victory, essentially what you would call it. Like, we got to trick the Russians to win the space race. And that was a real popular explanation for it for a long time. Like, why would they fake it? Well, to trick the Russians. The problem with it is that the trick the Russians thing doesn't say because space is fake or space travel is impossible. It creates the illusion that there's this competition between, America and Russia over this new terrain, this new commons, outer space. But the truth of it is, they didn't fake the moon landing to trick the Russians. America and Russia faked the moon landing and faked space in general to trick the masses at the bottom. Russia and US use the same actor. Yeah, that's an interesting aspect to this, is if you look into Yuri Gagarin and his mysterious death and then the emergence of Neil Armstrong, it does appear to be, it's rather incredible. It does appear to be that the first man in space, national hero for Russia, fake dies and then portrays the same historically significant role for America as Neil Armstrong. Wouldn't shock me. Clockwork 113 says Jay Dyer pushes the alien invasion. Well, okay, so Jay Dyer is an example of somebody who's in the forest of fakery pointing out one fake tree. They're not looking at the bigger picture. So they're looking at a psyop, but not connecting it to the psy-war. And that's what our focus has been here, is that the people stuck in the Trutherville paradigm don't have a complete picture. They don't perceive the full extent of it all. And so that's why you can have someone like Candace Owens go out and say the moon landing is 100% fake, but then she'll never question the space station. She'll never question SpaceX. So they're not willing to go all the way. And the reason they don't go all the way, it's not that they're told, like Candace Owens it may not have crossed her mind. It's because they've been given limited explanations. These are actually called limited hangouts or limited hangout operations, where, and this could be, someone brought up World Trade Center 7. Like, now you have evidence of a conspiracy. Like, that might have been on purpose. If we leak evidence of a conspiracy, like, oh, look, this building fell and it shouldn't have. Now you've created a truther movement. And now the experts who come out, who are likely all controlled by the PSYOP entertainment complex, these experts are going to be the center of attention of all the alternative thinkers, who are now going to be fed an alternative version of things. Yes, you're right, it was a cover-up because of this. But the problem with this perspective is they're never going to be told it was all fake. So you'll find a limited hangout means you let a limited amount of the truth hang out there, and then you control the leak. It's a controlled leak. And I would say that every popular conspiracy theory out there is essentially a controlled leak, so that they can get all the free thinkers, which they have. So within the mainstream mediation, within the big closed system here, the free thinkers all get put into a box. They get put into a subset. So yeah, you're a blue pillar, but now you're awake to the red pill truths, but you never left the world stage. And what prevents them from leaving the world stage, some of the final guardrails, is the bloody guardrail, the death clingers. Oh, people die at these events. As long as your presupposition is that they kill people in psyops, you're not going to be able to see how big the production is. Like, you really do have to step back from that frame. I can't emphasize it enough. There's a guardrail covered in theatrical blood that is locking people down in the world of fakery. So the bloody guardrail is one of the main ones. Beyond the bloody guardrail, you've got simulation theory, which you might not think it's a big deal, but it is. It's endorsed by Joe Rogan, Elon Musk, Neil deGrasse Tyson. But simulation theory is not a theory. It's intelligent design, and it's God by another name. And the reason they put this guardrail up is that anytime somebody in Trutherville notices media fakery, instead of saying, hey, media is more controlled than we thought, because they have completely connected the entertainment with the news. So instead of noticing this, they're told, oh, these eerie coincidences, the so-called predictive programming saw in The Simpsons means that we're in a simulation. So if we're in a simulation, then fake news doesn't really matter anymore, because everything's fake. Critifest said, no way they would take a chance on killing 3 astronauts in front of the world. It was filmed backside at a secret military moon base. Now, do you think they actually sent Kate Perry into space? Because Jeranism believes that Katy Perry went to space. And he literally went from being a skeptic of media to being a true believer based on bad evidence. Like, he didn't see. I'm not just, this is not just Jeranism, but he didn't just go from being a skeptic to being a believer. He was never a skeptic. He was always a believer in the false flags. He was never an auto hoaxer, for one. But even if he went to Antarctica and arrived at a conclusion that we're on a ball, doesn't mean space travel is real. And the reason we say this is that the evidence doesn't support it. So we're looking at Kate Perry going up into space, and there's no G-forces on her. Like, her face isn't melting around her skull like it's supposed to. And so he's watching the video, and he's like, looks real to me. I can see the curve. I'm like, okay, so you're obviously either heavily insulated or well paid to not think too deeply about it. But the error in the guardrail thinking is that you arrive at a conclusion too soon. And arriving at that conclusion too soon prevents you from looking deeper. So the reason why I even targeted for debunking things like the Mandela effect and sync theory, as in synchromysticism, is that the Mandela effect and synchromysticism keep people in the world stage paradigm itself. It's 100% the case. So there's one more guardrail beyond the fake blood and beyond the cognitive sabotage of nothing is real. There's one more guardrail. It's the one that keeps people from admitting that they've been wrong and they've clung to wrong answers for a long time. That final guardrail, and this is the highest one, this is the biggest one, this is the one that keeps 99% of the people locked down, is the ego. And the ego, in terms of defending the beliefs that they have, is tied to conformity, which is basically fear of going against the grain. And it's also a construct that comports with the world stage to the extent that you're attached to it. And this also includes truthers. And there's a lot of reasons for this, which I go into in that book. You know, I mean, imagine making your living like Richie from Boston, crying wolf about chemtrails your entire life. So you spent 20 years screeching at the clouds and ignoring the well-documented explanation, the scientific evidence. But I mean, it's not a mystery. So they're out there proclaiming it's a mystery. I'm mystified by these lines in the sky. We're all going to die. Send me some money. Buy my storable food items. Prepare for the bunker life. So you get these doomsayers who make a lot of money in the red pill community by pushing the idea that we're being oppressed and there's chemicals in the sky and we're all going to die. So they push that for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. Now, what would happen if Richie from Boston went on a plane and a pilot explained to him, hey, it's really freaking cold up here at 30,000 feet. And that jet exhaust is hot air. And if you look, the trails form way behind the airplane. So you can't even call it a spray. Like, what if somebody explained it to him in a way he could understand it, if his ego stopped him from refuting this? Well, then he would have to admit to his fan base that, hey, I've spent the last 15, 20 years hyping up a non-existent fear, stressing you out, the world was never going to end, I was wrong. You can't say, I was wrong, if your ego blocks your ability, your integrity there. And that happens. Yeah, he would just digress, says Esteban. Yaywoot123 says, I was on a date. It was going perfect. I thought she must be the one. Right before we parted ways, boom. Wig was off and I heard gotcha. It was James O'Keefe. Oh yeah, James O'Keefe is a master of disguise. You know, this guy sitting at a bar talking to some dude with glasses. And he's like, yeah, I work for the CDC, and the anti-vaxxers were right. This is all some mass depopulation experiment, and Bill Gates is going to block the sun. Bwahaha. Like evil villains confessing. And then James O'Keefe emerges from behind the glasses. He takes the glasses off. It was me, James O'Keefe, the whole time. And I got you on camera, and I'm going to share this with Alex Jones. Dr. Fauci's the bad guy. Yeah, James O'Keefe is a huge, colossal fraud. It's all theater. How many of these like fake independent journalists out there get a lot of credit for being independent? You got Laura Loomer, James O'Keefe. Well, now he's O'Keefe Media Group. He got fired from his Project Veritas because he was using all the money they raised to pay for black SUVs and expensive parties where he would DJ. And they would pay dance instructors, they do choreography. They were just making music videos and living lavishly. That's all he did. And I look at the guy, I'm just waiting for some scandal to come out. I mean, I get groomer vibes off him. You know, he's always recruiting new people, young people, and bringing them into the fold. I don't know. There's something about it that seems off. But the fact of it is, we know that he's completely controlled opposition, because there's nothing that these independent journalists can expose that goes outside the established parameters of world stage media. Marcel says, it would be strong and good to admit mistakes if someone is smart. Oh, yeah, exactly. I mean, I think we all have to arrive at this. In order to exit the mainstream box, you had to take a hit. I was wrong. They got me. And then you get into Trutherville. You swallow a bunch of red pills. Maybe you even hit the Q pipe. And then at some point you're like, wow, I was wrong about that. I was misled. That was wrong. Or I tacitly accepted the existence of this and it's not true. I was wrong. So saying I was wrong it's part of the process. You know, we're talking about a methodology here where you have a hypothesis, you test it. You have a model, it gets debunked, you move on. People who can't admit that they're wrong, at first they can kind of cling on to it, but over time they begin to look increasingly detached from reality. They grasp at straws, and in order to preserve their belief systems, they actually have to insulate themselves against outsiders. Religions work this way. Cults work this way. I was wrong about climate change. I was wrong about 9/11. I was wrong about even the anti-vax position. And I was wrong because I didn't look into it enough to reject the default oppositional position. So at first, I was never an anti-vaxxer. I was in the military. I was jabbed with all kinds of concoctions to protect me from things or whatever. But, you know, to us, it was like, hey, you get an anthrax shot, you get the rest of the day off. Okay, I'll deal with the knot on my shoulder. But when the anti-vax movement came out, I immediately saw a red flag. None of them are calling the thing fake or a psyop. It's a huge false flag narrative. And it took over Trutherville. So over the last few years, we've learned to recognize the dialectic of the pro and the anti, and how the pro and the anti are both fed from the same source, and they both assume the mainstream mediation POV. So the anti position is not the same thing as truth. And that's the trap they get into. So how many anti positions have you taken? Anti-geoengineering, anti-this, anti-that. Yeah, these might all be part of a controlled dialectic that all presuppose that you're on the world stage. And one other point before I go here, I'm developing on this idea of belief clusters. Like when it comes to the world stage belief systems, can you just believe in one issue and not fall in line with all the other issues? And my contention is that no. that you can't just be a single issue truther. Like, yeah, I'm not really with Truth Revealer Alex Jones, but I'm totally against geoengineering. No, because with the anti-geoengineering premise comes a whole lot of other things built into it that aren't obvious. Because ultimately it's a whodunit, and there is an answer. So the entire red pill group of issues are all part of a cluster of beliefs. And so we have to look at these things as clusters. That's why I harp on certain things like chemtrails, because to accept the existence of chemtrails is to go on the world stage and shift onto the right side with all the related issues. It's rather intriguing to watch. That's why I think I'm very comfortable calling it the program. Like, we are the IPS Deprogram, because there is in fact a program. And the program comports the programmed, who are NPC-like followers of it, to the meta script and the total complicity with our manufactured history. Esteban says, I got bamboozled by the vax hype and took a side. But yeah, we all did. See, I mean, my default position was, even at that point, with all the hype and stuff, I was like, okay, I can kind of see here how this thing is being set up, but I'm going to give the truthers the benefit of the doubt. And so what I did for 2020 and 2021 is I let anti-vaxxers come on my show and screech about vaccines for 10 minutes. And every time I lost a channel, if you remember, 10, 20, 30, 40 channels being taken down, all for this. Now, I don't care if you're against it. Like, I don't care if you're anti-alcohol. So here's my point here. When I hear people like they're still anti-vaxxers, I'm like, well, I wouldn't take it. Like, I get that. Well, why don't you call yourself a non-vaxxer? Let me ask you, if you're against drinking, are you anti-drinking or are you a non-drinker? Are you anti-smoking or are you a non-smoker? The non-position is 100% acceptable. It's defensible. It's rational. It's reasonable, especially if you have suspicions. But the anti-position is a hysterical overreaction, and it's a propaganda-fed movement. So reject the anti, go with the non. I'm not an anti-drinker. I'm a non-drinker. Because I'm not to name names, but a name that rhymes with Flynn is like, how many vaxes did you take? You're just telling us to get the death jab. I'm like, look, just because I'm not in your anti-position doesn't mean I am therefore pro. And anytime somebody anti accuses you of being pro, they're in a cult. I'm like, no, there's a position. It's called non, the negative. Jennifer Reese says, it's okay. I used to watch Crow 777 and believed his moon stuff. I did too. And Crow 777 is a vinegar boiler. He believes that he's getting rid of cirrus clouds by boiling vinegar. That guy will never admit to being wrong. He's built too much of a identity around it. The lunar waves. You know, I can't find it, but there was a podcast where he was talking to Owen Benjamin, and they were discussing CEs, which I don't even want to get into. They were both discussing CEs. And I thought, well, maybe the way that he's taking caffeine is causing his hands to shake, and maybe that's causing the camera to vibrate and result in the lunar waves. So the lunar wave is when the moon appears to like wave all the way through. MSO Win says, good analogy, non instead of anti. Yeah, I'm working on a chapter for the book, non instead of anti, so I can build a bridge to the anti-vaxxers who think I'm controlled opposition. It's like, no, you can leave that stance and preserve the integrity of your epidermis. You don't need to go get penetrated by Big Brother. You don't have to capitulate to something you fundamentally disagree with because of peer pressure. but you don't have to jump into a controlled opposition stance, because the anti-stance is a belief cluster. And there's a lot of ugliness within that belief cluster that you're likely not a part of. One more thing about Crow 777 before I go here. You might want to look this up. Look up Crow instability. So your airplane creates these vortices. The jet engines, spirals in the air. And this creates a wave. The wingtip vortices create a wave. But you can't see it because it's in the air. It's in the atmosphere. But if the moon is out and a plane flies by, one of these vortices can create a lunar wave. So wingtip vortices, this vortex creates the lunar wave. Now, when you look at the contrails, sometimes they're straight lines or sometimes they look like this. You've seen these ones where it looks like a broken up, almost like a zipper. And truthers will say, oh, that's them dropping the packets of chemicals. No, that's actually part of the spiral formation from the vortex. This is called the Crow instability, based off of the scientist who specialized in fluid dynamics who discovered the cause of this being, of course, the jet engines. So Crow instability, as in wingtip vortices, caused this effect. So it's interesting that the guy who noticed the lunar wave goes by the name Crow. Just a weird coincidence. Esteban says, crap 777, where vinegar is the enemy of chemtrails. Well, one more point on him, and I'm only bringing him up because he's popular and he's a proponent of these certain ideas, is that he will never admit to being wrong about lunar waves. In fact, I've heard him try to distract from this explanation. He claims only hypersonic jets can cause that. But one of the reasons why he'll never back down is that he promotes the idea that even during the big eclipse, that by putting vinegar out, he cleared the skies. That's just such a big claim. And he's convinced so many people that I don't think that his ego will let him back down. His money might be tied to it, but I think that Crow 777 could never possibly admit to being wrong about boiling vinegar, somehow clearing the skies. I mean, look, they must be boiling a lot of vinegar. That's called faulty causality. You could have boiled water. You could have just stared at the clouds, and they would have gone away the same. Faulty causality fallacy. So imagine being so attached to a wrong answer that you will forever deny yourself the truth, that you will forever be trapped in an alternative belief system rather than leaving belief systems and working from within an operating system, a stable philosophical stance rooted in skepticism. I mean, that's what they're being denied. You want to stay on the world stage, you can stay a liar in a world of liars at various levels of culpability. But there are no truthers in Trutherville, and there are no chemtrails off world stage. I think a lot of truthers are married to their red pill issues, and again, the money makes it hard. They've been crying wolf. But we'll see. Because as time goes on, as more people adopt the off-world stage perspective and abandon these various truther orthodoxies, they'll find it increasingly difficult to maintain these positions, which are untenable. They will find it increasingly difficult to seem relevant to audiences who now want to understand metascript deconstruction, psyops, concurrent programming, the PSYOP entertainment complex, and how it really works. There are people who are legitimately interested in the truth here. Not everyone here is a right-wing culture warrior trying to get Trump reelected. Not everyone here is hitting the Q pipe. It's mostly just bad habit. And the reason why I think a lot of people stick to it is there has not been an alternative. You've only had anti and pro. We're the ones introducing the non. I'd like to introduce the world to the non-vaxxers as distinct from the antis. You no longer have to march behind Alex Jones because you agree on one particular issue. You no longer have to be lumped in with a bunch of brainwashees. There's a rational third alternative. And this is really the core concept of off-world stage media, is that we're platforming legitimate positions that don't have representation on the world stage. Obrique says they want to believe in second shooters. Yeah, that's the bloody guardrail. I call them death clingers. Like, you tell them nobody died, and they're like, don't say that. Somebody died. I'm like, okay, you're just clinging to, you're a corpse clutcher. And it's a moral thing, moral high ground. Or they emotionally became attached to an event. Or they lied and claimed they know somebody who died at an event. But what we're pro-offering here, the IPS think tank, is a platform for those who aren't caught up in alternative brainwashing. Just because people leave mainstream doesn't mean they now found a way to critically examine the news media they're consuming, because what they did instead was they gathered around the big loudmouths in the alternative media ecosystem and just fell in line and marched lockstep. Like, we're antis, we're against the pros. Yeah, you're locked in. It's the black and white checkerboard you always see in the Masonic temples and all the symbolism. The black and the white checkerboard floor, which they call the level. They are on the level. And they're all standing on top of the black and the white tiles. And I think that's very symbolic of how the secret societies are those who have been initiated about the very existence of this bifurcated mind war. The black and the white pillar, the political horseshoe, it's all intrinsic to the world stage and its infrastructure. All right, we'll be back. My internet's down, so I'm not going to have any new videos up today, but I'll have it up by tomorrow.